So we have already seen some of the modification that can be present in the mucosal layer of the alimentary canal. So you have seen the deep tubular glands, you have seen the crypts of Lieberkühn. Crypts of Lieberkühn are present in small and large intestine as well, and they were acting as the secretory apparatus for the enzymes, various types of enzymes and mucoid secretions in the alimentary canal. Now you need to increase the absorptive surface area, so there has to be fold. Remember, some folds are also present even before. So you can have some folds that are present in the stomach. They are called as rugae. But but primarily we are talking about the later half of the alimentary canal of the ileum, where most of the absorption will take place of this end product of digestion, where the mucosa is thrown into finger-like projections, and these finger-like projections, they are called as villi. Obviously this is where the submucosa will be present, and you will see here there would be the blood vessels. So you will see the blood vessels, and you will also see central lacteal. So we are going very fast here, and you probably are absolutely comfortable about the anatomy of a villus, and this is where this is the lumen from where the end product of the digestion have to be absorbed into the body and will be transported by either the vascular system or the lymphatic system. But what happens here is that so many students are not able to appreciate that there is a cell here. So this is a brush bordered columnar epithelium, and therefore the end product of digestion will first enter into this epithelium and then will be absorbed into the body and transported by the vascular system and the lymphatic. And here is where the students actually feel very confused in this section of NCERT, where the absorption is being taught about, whether it is active or the passive. And the older NCERT edition was talking about, say for example, glucose, sometimes active, sometimes passive. We must understand that the glucose will enter into the cell, then from the cell through the basolateral border somewhere here will enter into this space, and then carried out by the blood or the blood. If we are talking about glucose, it will be carried out by the blood, and then it will be transported into the body cell to be assimilated, metabolized, etc. And now let me give you very quickly what happens in the absorption. So what happens in the absorption? Just pay attention. I am making two cells. These are the columnar epithelial cells. They are brush border, and another epithelial cell. You are looking at the tight junction at the apical part. You can see they are very closely packed. This is the lumen part of the alimentary canal, and what happens is that at the basolateral end you will find a large number of mitochondria, and something active may be going here, and the process, actually the story begins by active transport of sodium out of the cell into that space where the blood vessels were present. So first and foremost, what happens is that the sodium is thrown out of this cell into this space. This would obviously be active transport. You know that the principal cation in the extracellular fluid is sodium. So we are transporting sodium from intracellular fluid to the extracellular fluid. This has to be against a concentration gradient, and hence will require ATP energy, and hence is an active transport. And if you are actually transporting sodium outside, then the sodium which is present here in the lumen will actually feel a drag force. So there would be a drag force that will be created. So that means this sodium will try to enter into the cell, and before that we also know that wherever sodium goes, the water goes. So if the sodium is transported from A to B, the water will also follow, and therefore we can safely say that this water is actually transported into this part from the lumen, and water is always by osmosis. So water is always by osmosis. So it follows the transport of the sodium. I hope this thing is now absolutely clear. Now the sodium is trying to enter into the cell, but the problem is that there is a cell membrane here, and this is an ion, and it is a polar molecule. It cannot just diffuse across the cell membrane, but it is going from a higher concentration to lower concentration. So therefore there needs to be a transporter which is present here, and this transporter is the sodium transporter, and using this transporter sodium will enter into the cell, and this sodium is entering into the cell and is being pumped out from this this basal and lateral part of the cell into the space that is enclosed by the finger-like projection, which are called as villi. So you can just imagine, I am throwing sodium out, the sodium is trying to come in, and it will require a transporter. It is coming from a higher concentration to lower concentration, but the process begins because of the active transport. So this is active transport at this end, and this transporter can actually transport along with it the glucose, galactose and amino acid, and therefore we say that glucose, galactose and amino acids are co-transported. This is a secondary active transport. Secondary active transport, it is a co-transport with sodium. So whenever sodium uses its transporter, tries to enter into the cell, it brings along with it glucose, galactose and amino acid. So we are now absolutely sure what happens during the absorption of glucose, galactose and amino acid, what is meant by a secondary active co-transport with sodium. I hope this thing is now absolutely clear. Now, the fructose molecule will always be transported by facilitated diffusion. So fructose, wherever it goes, will be from higher to the lower concentration, and it will always be facilitated diffusion. So now you know that how the body absorbs glucose, galactose and fructose. This is the story of carbohydrate, and you know that how it actually absorbs the amino acid and the story of proteins. Now we need to know about the end product of fat digestion. So we are saying that this is, let us say, fatty acid, and let us say this is glycerol, and there would be a micelle formation. Now please remember, the bile salts will also be coming down. Will be coming down to this place in the terminal part of the ileum. They were released into the second part of the duodenum along with the bile secretion. If you remember, they helped in the mechanical process, which is emulsification of fat, breaking of large fat globules into small fat globules, and now they are also coming down. And this time now they will help in the absorption of the end products of the fat digestion. And you can see again there would be a micelle formation, and this micelle formation will carry the end product of the fat digestion into the intestinal epithelial cells. So this is fatty acid, this is glycerol, it has been transported with the help of the bile salt, the micelle formation. They do it again and again. This is called as the ferrying action, and this is how they are transported, mind you, into the lining cells of the intestinal epithelium. I hope this thing is now absolutely clear. Once they have been transported into the cell, the bile salts themselves are reabsorbed and undergo what is called as enterohepatic circulation. Entero means intestine and hepatic means liver, so they can be secreted again. Many times the same bile salt will be secreted. If they are damaged, obviously they are passed in the feces along with the digested product. And what happens inside the cell? And this cell is a eukaryotic cell. This is a cell of our body. There would be smooth endoplasmic reticulum, and you know from your earlier classes that one of the function of the smooth endoplasmic reticulum is lipid synthesis, and it will synthesize again the phospholipids, the triglycerides, etc. So all the lipids that were broken down are synthesized again in the smooth endoplasmic reticulum of the lining epithelial cell, and then they are packaged into a protein coat, and this thing is called as chylomicron. And this is very important to understand that this chylomicron is formed here, and because this chylomicron is now being transported here and it is a larger structure, it cannot be transported by the blood vessel. It is carried actually by the central lacteal or the lymphatic vessel that joins into the lymphatic duct, and the lymphatic duct actually returns this thing back to the blood at a level of a vein. So we have already talked about lymph, and we know that lymph is actually one-way transport, and it actually transports the extra interstitial or the tissue fluid back to the vascular system. And these capillaries, the lymphatic capillaries, they actually lacteals, they join to form the small lymphatic vessels, the largest lymphatic vessels, which join to form what are called as the lymphatic duct. And lymphatic duct, normally there are two, they are two in number. One of them opens into the left subclavian and the second one opens into the right subclavian, but that is not needed. But what is tried what is important to understand that these things are actually returned back to the vascular system, and this is how fat end product of fat digestion is absorbed in our body. And obviously now you know that the vascular system here, please try to remember the earlier classes, you know about the hepatic portal vein, and they will carry the vascular system. The vein here, there would be a vein that connects two organs directly, neither of which is heart, begins in capillaries, ends in capillaries. From the intestine to the liver, there would be a vein which is called as hepatic portal vein, and whatever goes into the vascular system is first going to the liver take care of the primary metabolism, and then they are released into hepatic vein, and then they come into general circulation. And we already know that the lymphatic vessel actually returns the thing back into the vascular system at the level of the subclavian vein, and now they are transported to the cells, where the cells will assimilate these things. They will use them into catabolism, anabolism, into other usable form, whatever the cell requires, and this process would be called as the assimilation. I hope this thing is now absolutely clear. Now please remember some special cases. So alcohol, acetyl salicylic acid, what is called as aspirin, they can be absorbed from the stomach. Actually they are absorbed from the stomach, and both are known to cause gastritis. Most of the iron will be from duodenum, a small amount would be from jejunum as well. So please try to remember iron, and please try to remember the alcohol and the drug that I am talking about. And finally, I have already told you about vitamin B12, the most distal part of the ileum from where it is absorbed into the body, because this is what the students actually miss many times. I hope this thing is now absolutely clear. Now, what happens is that now this thing which is not absorbed is going into the large intestine, and now it has to be get rid of, and the process would be called as egestion. Mind you, it is not called as excretion, so I am calling it as egestion. So this is something which is not digested, not absorbed, is now being egested out of the body. And we have already talked about the large intestine. There are crypts of Lieberkühn there, but they actually secrete only mucoid secretion. Most of the water. So please remember, this is a question that I wanted to do separately. Around 7 to 9 liters of water is to be absorbed in the intestine per day. Most of it, out of 9 liters, around 7 liters is actually absorbed by the small intestine. Please listen to me carefully. Largest amount of water is absorbed by the small intestine, and after the small intestine, only a small amount of water actually enters into the large intestine. Say a typical value may be 2000 ml, and out of that 2000 ml, bearing 30 to 40 ml, everything else is absorbed by the large intestine. So large intestine, yes, it absorbs water, it absorbs certain minerals, no doubt about it, but it is largest fraction. Still the largest amount of water is actually absorbed by the small intestine. When they talk about fraction, then the answer would be the large intestine. And then what happens is that there is a mass peristalsis movement. This will lead to the egestion. The process is called as defecation. So the question to remember would be that egestion occurs through a mass peristaltic movement, which leads to the egestion or the defecation of the leftover thing. And please remember the rectum. Rectum was a storage place for feces. So rectum is where the feces had been stored. I hope this thing is now absolutely clear. So let me talk about egestion, and we are talking about a mass peristaltic movement, and this is peristaltic movement, and we are calling the thing as defecation. And please remember the importance of the ileocecal wall that prevents the reflux of the fecal matter back into the small intestine. This is very, very important. And please remember that large intestine actually absorbs the largest fraction of the water that reaches it. The largest amount, but lesser fraction, is actually absorbed by the small intestine. So this is how absorption takes place. This is what your NCERT is talking about in this chapter. Finally, a word about the disorders. So I am not going to write a lot on the board, so let me give you some questions directly on disorders. So the first disorder is jaundice. So when you are talking about intestinal system or the gastrointestinal system or the digestive system. So it is imperative to understand that the most common cause of the jaundice here would be hepatitis, and this hepatitis is actually hepatitis A, and it is caused by hepatitis A virus. This is very different from hepatitis B virus. It is transmitted through contaminated food and water, and it doesn't have a lot of sequelae, and with proper rest and adequate diet, a person will always get to normal after a few days. So this is a hepatitis, inflammation, viral inflammation of the liver cell, which is called as hepatitis, but we are talking about hepatitis A. Obviously there will be some problems in the common bile duct, etc., that can also lead to jaundice. There may be some pre-hepatic, post-hepatic causes, and the hepatic causes that you will know in your first year of MBBS. We will leave it for now itself. Then you come to what is called as vomiting. So vomiting is expulsion of the upper gastrointestinal contact through mouth. So that means the part that is present in the stomach and a little bit maybe from the stomach, this is coming back through mouth, and this is forceful expulsion. This would be called as vomiting. Now what is very important to understand is that this food has not yet undergone digestion, leave alone the absorption part. So it contains some essential nutrients. So if you ask me to compare diarrhea and vomiting, I would say that continued vomiting would be a much more worrisome sign for me, because this can lead to nutrient depletion, because nothing has been digested and absorbed yet. So this is very important to understand, and the important question would be about the vomiting center that actually is located in medulla oblongata. Diarrhea would be the passage of loose or semi-formed stools, 3 or more than 3 in number per day. This is what is called as diarrhea. So a common cause of diarrhea, we have talked about this in common human diseases, would be in children. Say for example rotavirus and viral infections can commonly cause diarrhea. We will go at length in human health and disease. Just remember what exactly is diarrhea. Obviously any colitis, the inflammation of the wall of the colon, will lead to inadequate absorption of the water across the wall of the colon and can lead to diarrhea as well. And we will look at the specific conditions about diarrhea in human health and disease. On the other hand, the reverse would be constipation. So very hard stool, infrequent, this would be called as constipation, and the constipation can be actually cured with the help of say for example cellulose fibers, because they mix with the food, they are hygroscopic, they absorb water, they increase the mass effect of the feces, and that can lead to the pressure on the sphincters and dilation, and therefore lead to easy defecation. That would be the rationale for using aluminium salts as well. And if you are using aluminium salts in laxatives, and these aluminium salts will not be absorbed across the wall of the intestine, because as a rule the divalent cation, the trivalent cations are not easily absorbed along the intestine, and therefore they will actually have the same effect. They will keep water with them and make the feces bulky and passage easy. So this is what is called as constipation. The other thing which is called as indigestion, I told you I will not write, but probably now I will have to write it. This is indigestion, and please try to remember an important word which is called as dyspepsia. So dyspepsia is a clinical condition where there is bloating, abdominal fullness, there would be GERD, the reflux esophagitis, there can be burping, belching, and obviously there would be discomfort and pain abdomen. So all these things would be called as dyspepsia or indigestion. It can be caused by anxiety, for the simple reason that anxiety would be because of the sympathetic stimulation, and I have already told you that sympathetic stimulation is inhibitory to the gut. It is inhibitory to the gut, and obviously the consumption of these spicy foods can also cause indigestion. So these are the questions that can be asked. And finally, something about protein energy malnutrition. So even in this video, I am going to ask you some questions. Or okay, let me give you straight away just the idea that what exactly they can ask in protein energy malnutrition. And please remember, this is a very, very important question. I will not be surprised if it is reflected in this year entrance examination. So there are two ends of the spectrum. One would be called as marasmus, and the second would be called as the kwashiorkor. So protein energy malnutrition. So we are looking at a decrease in the calorie in the form of proteins or energy. So this is protein energy malnutrition, kwashiorkor and marasmus, and you will be asked about the difference between the two and what causes actually marasmus and what causes kwashiorkor. So kwashiorkor is protein deficiency but adequate calories. So calories are adequate but protein is deficient. This is kwashiorkor. And if you look at marasmus in both of them are deficient. This is absolutely critical to understand that what causes kwashiorkor and what causes marasmus. Then they will ask you, so this is cause. The second question they will ask you about the age of incidence, and this is less than 1 year, and this is normally more than 1 year, around 1.5 years, and it is significantly associated with the process of the weaning when the infant is removed from the mother breastfeed and is given supplemental food, the food other than the mother milk. Then there is a problem. This thing can happen. And the third thing they would ask you about some clinical sign symptoms. So this is where please try to remember that they are going to ask you something peculiar about marasmus and something peculiar about kwashiorkor, and this is where I think the question can be framed. It has edema. So there is a putting edema and a significant edema in the lower limb. There can be a distended abdominal as well, and obviously there can be fatty infiltrate of liver. So fatty liver infiltrates. So liver infiltrate. But please remember edema. Please remember edema. And edema is not a characteristic feature of marasmus. Here you would see a significant and a severe emaciation. So much so that even the subcutaneous fat is gone. Muscle wasting is seen in both. But there is severe emaciation. Severe emaciation in marasmus. This is where the 3 points where they can actually ask you a question from. I hope now you have enjoyed the discussion on digestive system. I hope this is helping you in your final preparation for NEET entrance exam.